the United States Navy called the LCP the Instrument of Amphibious Victory. That was the official characterization, and it was not wrong. The landing craft, vehicle, personnel, the Higgins boat, named for Andrew Higgins of New Orleans, who designed and argued for it until the Navy accepted it, was the machine that made the beach assaults of the Pacific and the European theaters operationally possible. It could carry 36 men or a light vehicle. It could approach a beach at 9 knots, drop a steel ramp, discharge its cargo, and back off to reload. Eisenhower himself would later say that Andrew Higgins won the war for us. That without the Higgins boat, the operation could not have been planned. The boat was correct for the mission. It was built in large numbers, by the tens of thousands, and it worked as designed in every engineering parameter that the design specified. What the official characterization of the Higgins boat as the instrument of amphibious victory did not include was a description of what 36 men experienced inside one during the approach to Omaha Beach on the morning of June 6, 1944, in the specific 30 minutes between leaving the transport ships and reaching the waterline. The machine worked. The men inside it were sick, cold, terrified, packed together in a steel and plywood box they could not see out of, heading toward a beach they could not see, soaked from the channel swells they'd been taking over the bow for the previous 40 minutes, and they were going to step off the ramp at the end of the crossing into water that might be over their heads, onto a beach where everything above the waterline was trying to kill them, in equipment weighing 60 to 80 pounds, with the specific knowledge that the tanks that were supposed to support their crossing of the beach had not arrived because the tanks had sunk. The machine was correct for the mission. The men inside it paid what the mission cost. Before we go any further, subscribe to Steel and Salt right now. Every script we produce comes from weeks inside the archives, after-action reports, and survivor testimonies. We do this because these men deserve to have their stories told exactly as they happened. When you subscribe, you send a signal to the YouTube algorithm that this content matters. It costs you nothing. Subscribe now. The LCP measured 36 feet and 3 inches from bow to stern and 10 feet and 10 inches across the beam. She drew 2 feet of water forward with the ramp in the up position and 3 feet aft, the flat-bottomed hull specifically designed so that a fully loaded boat could approach a beach and deposit its cargo without grounding too far from the waterline. She was built from plywood, marine plywood, laminated and treated, designed for the shallow water work the mission required, with a steel bow ramp that dropped hydraulically and that, when vertical, formed the forward wall of the space where the 36 men stood. The sides of the hull rose to approximately 4 feet above the deck level, which was enough to prevent a standing man from seeing the horizon and not enough to stop a rifle bullet or a machine gun round entering from above. She was powered by a gray Marine 671 diesel developing 225 horsepower, and she was loud in the way that a diesel engine in a steel and plywood hull with 36 men in it is loud. The sound filling the interior and eliminating normal speech and combining with the wave noise and the distant gun sounds to produce a total acoustic environment in which the only communication available was shouting into a man's ear and hoping for the best. A crew of 3 operated her, the coxswain at the stern, standing behind a small shield that protected him from roughly the waist down but left him exposed above from the waist up, operating the tiller and the throttle and navigating by compass bearing and the visual references that the smoke and spray of the assault permitted him to use. 2 seamen amidships to operate the ramp and assist with loading and casualties. The coxswain was typically between 17 and 22 years old. He had been trained for this specific function at the amphibious training bases, and his training had included beach approach techniques, tidal navigation, and what the doctrine called casualty procedures. The casualty procedures were the procedures for managing men who had been hit before the ramp dropped or at the moment it dropped, and their inclusion in the training curriculum reflected the operational assumption, accurate and documented in the planning materials, that the first waves would sustain casualties at the ramp. The coxswain's training had included this assumption. It had not included what it would feel like to act on it while looking at Omaha Beach. The men who loaded into the LCVPs at Omaha Beach on the morning of June 6, 1944, loaded from the sides of the transport ships by climbing down cargo nets. Rope nets hung over the ship's side, the rope covered with the frost of a cold English Channel morning, the net swinging with the ship's motion in the 4 to 6 foot swells that the forecast had classified as acceptable for the operation, and that the men descending the net were classifying in different terms. They descended the net in full combat equipment: rifle, ammunition, entrenching tool, gas mask, rations, first aid kit, and personal gear totaling between 60 and 80 pounds. The LCP alongside rose and fell in the swells, the gap between the net and the boat's hull closing and opening at intervals that required the man descending to judge the moment of boarding correctly, or be crushed between the rope and the hull, or be thrown into the channel when the hull surged away. Men were injured loading. Men went into the water loading. The ones who went into the water went down fast, because 70 pounds of equipment in a life jacket at 13-degree channel water is a physics problem with one solution. The loading proceeded. The operation required it to proceed, and it proceeded in the way that operations requiring men to do dangerous things in sequence proceed. The next man followed the previous man, and the one after him followed him. Once loaded, the LCP held its 36 men in a space the size of a large closet, standing packed together tightly enough that falling was impossible because there was nowhere to fall. The men could see the sky above the 4-foot hull sides and the steel ramp forward and the back of the man directly in front of them. They could not see the beach. They could not see the other boats. They could see the expressions of the men around them, which reflected with consistency what the men around them were experiencing. The LCVP in the holding pattern before the assault waves were released moved in circles in the channel swells while the other boats assembled, and the flat-bottomed hull in a circular motion in 4 to 6 foot swells is a specific motion that the human vestibular system processes, as distinct from every other form of vessel motion in the direction that produces nausea. There was no ventilation inside the LCP below the hull sides. The diesel exhaust from the boat's engine combined with the exhaust from the dozens of other boats nearby. The smell of diesel, salt water, and the specific biological output of 36 men in a small space in cold, rough water was the atmosphere inside an LCP in the holding pattern before HR. By the time the assault wave was released and the boats turned toward the beach, a significant fraction of the men inside had already been sick. The others had approximately 30 minutes of approach before the ramp dropped. Those 30 minutes were the specific waiting period that the LCVP's function produced. A waiting period with a defined end whose character the men could anticipate and could do nothing about. The boat was moving toward the beach. The beach was where it was going. The ramp would drop. The things waiting on the other side of the ramp would still be there when it dropped. The men inside could not see this, but they could hear it. The sound of the naval gunfire above them transitioning as the bombardment lifted and the guns elevated, and then the sound of the German defensive weapons opening up as the boats came within range, and then the specific sounds that the first waves produced as they hit the beach ahead of the waves that were still in the water. The acoustic information was reaching the men inside the LCVP before the visual information did, and the acoustic information was specific and identifiable. At Omaha Beach on the morning of June 6th, the operational plan had specified that the first wave of infantry would be supported by DD tanks, duplex-drive Sherman tanks fitted with flotation screens that could be launched from their transport ships and swim to the beach, providing fire support as the infantry came ashore. Of the 29 DD tanks launched from the 741st Tank Battalion in the rough water off Omaha Beach, 27 sank before reaching the shore. The flotation screens were designed for moderate sea states. The sea state off Omaha on June 6th exceeded the design tolerance. The tanks went down with their crews in deep water in the minutes before HOR, and the beaches they had been designed to support were waiting for the infantry without the fire support that the plan had specified would be there. The infantry and the LCVPs approaching the beach did not know the tanks had sunk. The ramp would drop, and they would step off into the situation that the beach had produced, which was not the situation the plan had described. The first waves at Omaha came ashore between 0630 and 0700 against German defensive positions, bunkers, in-place machine guns, mortar positions that the naval and aerial bombardment had largely failed to suppress. The German 352nd Infantry Division, whose presence at Omaha had not been confirmed by Allied intelligence before the assault, occupied positions in the bluffs above the beach that had direct fire lines to the waterline. The distance between the waterline and the cover of the shingle bank at the base of the bluffs was approximately 200 yards of open beach. The crossing of that 200 yards was the mission that the LCVP's ramp deposited the men onto when it dropped. The machine gun that covers a 200-yard killing ground does not require precision aim. It requires sufficient ammunition and enough men to feed the belt. The German positions at Omaha had both. Company A of the 116th Infantry Regiment, 29th Infantry Division, came ashore in the first wave at the Dog Green sector of Omaha Beach. Company A had approximately 197 men. In the first 15 to 30 minutes after the ramps dropped, approximately 100 of them were casualties. The boats that brought them to that beach did not take casualties in the same proportions. The LCVPs themselves were not the primary target. The men exiting them were, but the boats were in the fire, and the coxswains who navigated them to the beach and held position while the ramps were down and the men were exiting were standing exposed from the waist up at the stern of a boat at the waterline of the most heavily defended beach in the German Atlantic Wall on the morning of June 6, 1944. One of those coxswains was Coxswain 3rd Class Robert Mallory of Dayton, Ohio, 19 years old, assigned to the attack transport USS Thomas Jefferson and responsible for one of the LCVPs she carried for the assault. Mallory had been trained at the amphibious base at Camp Bradford, Virginia, and had participated in training exercises off the Virginia coast that approximated the loading and beach approach procedures that the doctrine specified. The training exercises had not approximated the English Channel at 0630 on June 6th in the specific combination of factors: the swell, the smoke, the current that pushed the assault waves east of their designated landing sectors, the obstacles, the fire that Omaha Beach produced. Mallory made his first run to the beach at approximately 0640. He navigated by compass bearing through smoke that had been produced by naval gunfire, burning vehicles, and the haze of the morning, found his designated sector, and came into the waterline. The ramp dropped. He held position at the beach while the men went out. He described this in his after-action testimony as approximately 3 minutes. 3 minutes in which he stood at the stern of the LCP at the waterline of Omaha Beach during the first wave of the assault and operated the tiller and watched what the beach was doing to the men who had been inside his boat 60 seconds earlier, and then backed the boat off the beach and returned to the Thomas Jefferson for the second load. He made 4 runs. The operational requirement was to continue loading and running until the beach was secure or the boat was lost, and the beach was not secure until late in the afternoon of June 6th. Between the first run at 0640 and the 4th run in the early afternoon, the beach changed as the assault progressed. More men ashore, more suppression of the German positions, more boats on the waterline, more wreckage visible in the surf, and the coxswain who navigated the same course 4 times in a day that lasted from darkness to late afternoon experienced the beach's progression in a way that the soldiers who crossed it once in their specific minute of exposure could not. Mallory saw Omaha Beach from the waterline 4 times. He navigated through the surf zone past the wreckage of other boats and the obstacles, and the men in the water who were alive, and the men in the water who were not, 4 times because the operation required 4 runs, and because the operation required whoever was available to make them. He was not wounded. He returned to the Thomas Jefferson after the 4th run, as the afternoon light flattened on the channel, and the fire from the bluffs had reduced from what it had been at 0640 to what it was at 1600, which was different in quantity but still present. He wrote his after-action report in the words that after-action reports are written in: bearing time, cargo, casualties observed, beach conditions. The words were accurate. They described a record of 4 trips. They did not describe what 4 trips from the Thomas Jefferson to the waterline of Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944, deposited in a 19-year-old man from Dayton, Ohio, who stood at the stern of a flat-bottomed boat with his waist above the hull protection for approximately 12 minutes total across the 4 runs and watched what the beach was doing, and then backed off and went back for more men. Mallory returned to Dayton after the war and worked at a hardware distribution company for 31 years, retiring in 1977. His daughter, in an account she gave to the National D-Day Memorial Foundation's oral history program in 1995, said her father had spoken about his service with a consistency she described as limited and specific. He would describe the mechanics of operating the LCP, the tiller, the ramp hydraulics, the throttle management in surf conditions, with precision and evident interest. He would describe the channel weather on June 6th accurately when asked: the swell, the wind, the visibility. He would not describe the beach in direct terms. She said that the one time she had asked him directly what the beach had looked like, he had been quiet for a moment and had said that the color of the water was wrong. She had asked what he meant, and he had said the water at the waterline was the wrong color, and he had noticed it on the 1st run, and it had still been the wrong color on the 4th run, and he thought about it sometimes. He did not elaborate further. She said she understood later what he meant and did not ask again. He died in 2001 at the age of 76. He had been back to Normandy once in 1994 for the 50th anniversary ceremonies, and his daughter said he had stood at the water's edge at Omaha Beach for a long time in the morning before the official events began, looking at the water, and that when she had asked what he was looking at, he had said the color was right. He said it was the right color now. That is what it cost to be on a D-Day landing craft. Not the instrument of amphibious victory, not the machine that made the operation possible, but the 3 minutes at the waterline of Omaha Beach in the first wave, and the 4 trips back and the color of the water at the line where the sea met the sand on June 6, 1944. That a man from Dayton, Ohio spent 50 years checking against a reference that the beach had set in him at 19, and that took until the 50th anniversary of the crossing to confirm was gone. The color was right. He said it with the specific certainty of a man who had been checking something for 50 years and finally had his answer.